Welcome again back to the Locker Room podcast. We had an overwhelming response from our first episode. You can find them all on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, TuneIn, Stitcher, all of them. Just search for Deely Sport Science and you'll find it there. And head over to the website, deelysportscience.com. We've got offers there for the members and loads of content going up every day, including with our WhatsApp group and everything like that. Brilliant response, lads, from the first episode. It was really great to see so many people listening in and watching us up on YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, it was a very, very good response we got there, Ciaran. And, you know, it was very enjoyable to do as well. So I think we started it off really well.
I'm here again with Ross Bennett from QPR Academy and Joe Coulter, junior B player with Mayo Bridge in County Down. So it's good to have them back. Joe, your retro down jersey has gone viral on the internet, apparently.
Yeah, I've noticed that, Ciaran. I was just about this morning to put it up on eBay and try to sell it for maybe 500 quid. But my brother owns it, so he wouldn't be too happy with me.
So yeah, just anybody who's interested, make sure you subscribe. Head over onto all the platforms. You'll get them there. And the good thing about this podcast is every week we'll be putting it out. We're not going to have a season or anything like that. We're not going to only look at current topics. This will be every week. And sometimes actually the coming week, we've got one coming out on Tuesday morning and an additional S&C Sport Science one coming out on max speed and some other stuff on the Friday. And that'll be really geared towards a lot of coaches and S&C coaches. And we have some specific offers for people who are working in professional football there as well. So keep an eye on that. That should be good. Okay, man, we'll move on. I think last week we spoke about how to train people, how to train your team in this COVID-19 period. I think now is a natural progression on to, well, where is sport at the moment and what's actually going to happen with sport? I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment about return to sport, return to competition. We'll discuss really about, well, is that possible at all? Does it matter? Should we care about sport? And when it does return, what are we actually going to be looking at? Is it going to be a vastly different competition structure, or is it going to just continue on as normal? Ross, you're working in professional sport with QPR Academy. Can you give us a little bit of an update about just what's going on, like not particularly in QPR, but just in general in professional football?
Yeah, defo, Kiers. I think like in a lot of the clubs, especially from Championship or mid-Premiership, in terms of we're looking at the most financially stable clubs, the ones that are least financially stable from kind of bottom half of Premiership down, there's been a lot of media attention around staff being furloughed and stuff like that. And that's a similar situation to a lot of clubs are in. Luckily, myself, I haven't been furloughed, but there's a lot of people in the country that have been furloughed. And, you know, the services to players that are being given now is obviously reduced because of that. I think that's the current situation. We'll talk about what we think about that situation amongst the three of us. But, you know, I think football's got a real bad press in this, and the clubs are getting kind of hammered in a sense for furloughing staff. But for a lot of these clubs, the main way they're making money is through the game days and through, you know, money coming in, the gates and tickets and TV rights and stuff like that. So you take that away from a lot of the clubs, then, you know, the business isn't functioning as much. So I think it's a little bit unfair, apart from the top clubs, which we'll get onto topical issues, to really scrutinise clubs for doing this. They have to be sustainable. And there's been talk of lower league clubs actually not surviving this, especially academies, not surviving this period. So they have to look after themselves and for the long-term future, because I think we're going to be in a long-term battle with this right now.
Yeah, I think there's a few different levels in this, really, isn't there? Because the top clubs, the Champions League clubs, the top 6, the top 10, they'll get their gate receipts, and that's really important. But they make the most of their money off TV rights, you know, to selling to Sky and selling to Asia and Scandinavia and all around the world. So at the moment, they're somewhat insulated from this a bit. Whereas if you start going down to lower Premier League into Championship, it's very much more geared towards gate receipts. And if games aren't going on and you're not getting crowds in through the gate, then that's going to be a real problem. I think even the next level is, like you mentioned, the League One, the League Two, the non-league, the conference, clubs like that. like they were already really struggling to just stay afloat. And you really begin to wonder that, will these actually fold? Will they come back at all? And I don't know, will the government, is it going to be top of the list to support these lower league football clubs from the government? I'm not sure. And even, Matt Hancock, the health secretary, came out, didn't he? And in one of the daily briefings, and he said, well, footballers should take a cut and they should do the right thing, which, okay, granted, is fine, and that's probably true. But I mean, what about the actresses sitting at home, actors and actresses? What about the big financial Tory party donors? I didn't hear him saying anything to those about, well, you should take a cut for the good of the people.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, I think he was well out of order in what he said there, and I think he was panicking in a response probably to Piers Morgan, who's putting a little bit of pressure on all the government at the minute for different topics, and whatever he pushes seems to be a response in the briefings anyway. But look, of course, the footballers had to look at themselves, especially the top earners, when there's so many staff and people taking cuts and being furloughed and things like that. But it wasn't right for him to call them out directly. And you're right, football isn't separate to any other multi-million business, making business, and it should be looked as a whole thing, not just digging out footballers. But I think, clubs like Tottenham and Liverpool, they come under heavy scrutiny for furloughing all staff, and actually it got reversed. So that was probably right in that sense, because they probably have got the money at the moment to stabilise themselves through this period.
Yeah. And Joe, one of your teams, so you've got multiple teams apparently in multiple divisions. So one of your teams, Liverpool, the socialist man team, the team of the people of the city, they furloughed their staff and kept their players on the usual wages and got rid of their staff who are earning 20 grand a year, instead of doing anything with their higher up executive who are earning like 20 million a year. Like, can you still support them as a club?
Probably not, Ciaran, but it was a decision that wasn't really thought through from the hierarchy of Liverpool Football Club, and obviously a lot of the fan base wasn't too happy with it, and they came under a lot of pressure and they had to make that U-turn. And obviously Liverpool being one of the top clubs in the world, they can obviously afford to pay their staff, so it was really the wrong decision from Liverpool. But you do see some of Liverpool's players, like for example Jordan Henderson, and he's organised money that goes directly towards the NHS. So some of the clubs have gotten bad press over the last few weeks, but I think in general it's difficult for English Premier League clubs. I think Liverpool have made the right decision now.
Yeah, I think there's a historic lack of trust there from the players of the owners, and that it'll always come back down to that the players will take a cut, but what about the owners of the club, the absolute billionaires who own these Premier League clubs now, and what is there going to be an effect on them? Are they taking a cut as well, the executive? Now, I think the owners are obviously going to take a massive financial hit as well, aren't they? And I think it'll be really interesting when Ross, the longer this goes on, like when are Sky Sports and BT Sport going to come along and say, well, if there are no games, well, we're not going to pay the next installment of the TV rights. And I think if we get to that stage, and I don't know, will we, that's when it becomes a real problem for clubs then.
Yeah, and I think financially, like the period of when it's going to become a real problem is when we get into this traditional off-season period where contracts start running out, and Sky, and then they're within their right at that time not to pay next season's instalment, because at current there's going to be no games. So I think when players' contracts due to expire, staff's contracts due to expire, that's when we're going to start seeing clubs, I think, come under a bit more scrutiny and start making maybe a bit panic decisions around players, around staff, around cuts made to the club if this goes on further than end of May. Yeah,
it really depends on what's in the contract, isn't it? Like, it depends if there is a qualification in the contract that says if for whatever reason, natural disaster or whatever it is, games don't go ahead, what happens then? Does the money have to be paid out? And even in terms of the players' contracts, like for instance, if you think of, if your contract is up this summer, if you're on a 4-year contract or whatever, well, what happens then? Because like the club aren't going to offer you a new contract extension to sit at home and do your keepy uppies and Cruyff turns and stuff. So it'll be
Well,
interesting to see what'll happen.
yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough, but at the same time, if they're going to finish off this season, clubs aren't going to want to let players go. They're still going to want their assets to finish the season off. So,
Yeah.
like, I think it's going to be down to each club. That's the report coming out now, that it's down to each club individually and their discretion around contracts of players and how you extend. But they're going to have to keep the players on their side, because when we do return, you're going to want a fully strength team to field the rest of the season. So it's going to be very tricky and interesting one to watch.
Yeah, the PFA haven't really covered themselves in glory in some ways in terms of the leadership of the PFA. I mean, like the chief executive, he's still on his massive contract, like 2 million per year. He's been in the position for 20 to 25 years. He's coming out and saying he's not taking a wage cut. Like, they haven't been able to get all players to agree right across the board on, we're going to take a 10% cut or a 20% cut. It seems to be on a very ad hoc basis where clubs individually are deciding what they're going to do, and players, the leadership of the players in that club, in that team, are coming together and they're trashing out agreements with the individual club. That seems to be what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't waste your breath with the PFA. I think their services are, at times, they're too late, they're delayed, they're responsive, and they'll get put under pressure before anything gets made. So I think actually the players in each club should probably come to their own agreement. And you're employed by the club. I know the PFA there to support you, but you play for that club.
Yeah.
You're there to give services to that club. So I think the best way through this time is it's all individual. What situation is the club in? What situation are the individuals in that club? Because some of these clubs players, they're not getting paid thousands and thousands of pounds. You know, they're getting paid very modest wages. They have kids, they have mortgages. So if there was a 20% cut for them, for example, that could be catastrophic for them, as it is for most of us. So I think it's down to each club. I think it should go that way, and the players within that club to then kind of come up with the ideal solution to get them through this period.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, they give out about the GPA in Ireland. They should come over and listen to the PFA. But granted, obviously, Ross, like, the PFA do great work in terms of, dealing with mental issues of players after they retire, and support network. Like, every ex-player seems to be able to go on UEFA B, UEFA A, pro license, stuff like that. And they probably support them in that sense, don't they?
No, for sure. Listen, the PFA do some great work and really support. I'm just a bit bitter because I didn't extend the schoolboy as a player. I never got PFA membership. So I was never registered. So I'm a bit bitter. But look, they do some great stuff, and they offer, like, ex-players really good benefits around degrees, around further education of coaching, etc. But I think in these times, like organisations like the PFA, that's when you really need to step up, and that's when you need kind of real leadership for players to kind of lean on. And it's kind of, at this moment anyway, they've kind of not had that.
Yeah. See, the thing is, ultimately, people don't remember, and they don't think that they see these players on TV and it looks like they love playing football and how lucky they are and everything. Like, we know from working in professional football, those players, it's a job to them, isn't it? They don't care about any stuff. It's a job, it's a contract. They openly speak about money all the time in the dressing room. They talk about bonuses. They talk about getting a new contract. Like, their modus operandi is getting the team, perform well, play better, get a bigger contract, perform even better, get a move to a bigger club in the Champions League. Like, at the very, very top of the game, even players like Raheem Sterling, he's looking, well, can he get a move to Real Madrid, the absolute top of the pyramid of football? And in times like this, then, that's the way they think, that this is a contract. They've signed it, the club have signed it, and the club has to honour that contract.
Yeah, it's hard because we all sit at home and we all have our employment with our employees and whoever we work for, and we're all not worried, but we're proud, and that's the wage we're on, and taking a cut to anybody is not ideal, and we all take that to a personal level as well. So you're right. They think of it as a business. They obviously have pride for who they're playing for, and every player is individual and play for different reasons, but it is a job. But I think in this situation, I think those that are on, excessive amounts of money and the top earners, as Joe said about Jordan Henderson coming out and donating back, I think it's time then for them to reflect a little bit on that and say, well, the country's in crisis, the world's in crisis. How can I help and still be kind of financially stable in their lifestyle?
Yeah, it's interesting. Before we move on, the last point about Arsenal have actually just come out. Well, sorry, they haven't officially announced, but they've said they're likely to announce in the coming days that their players have agreed a 12% cut. So they're not talking about a deferral of wages like Southampton and some others have done, and they've got positive press about that. But the Arsenal players have agreed to a 12% cut if they don't make the Champions League. And if they make the Champions League, if the season goes ahead again, then they get that money back. So it's kind of like a performance-related cut. And there's a lot of talk about Arsenal are kind of using this moment and this event to kind of make cuts that they've been looking to make over the last few years.
And also maybe put a bit of pressure on the team to start performing. I think that's the big one. And look, every club's going to have their own way of doing it, Kiers, and I don't think there's any right and wrong. Obviously, there's moral obligations to if you're on big money to obviously give some back or maybe defer and stuff. But I think we have to treat it like any other business, and it's up to the company, that specific club, to see what they can do that's right for the players, and also right for what's going on now.
Yeah, definitely. So, Joe, we had the GAA Special Congress yesterday, so remotely. So when they made their votes, because a few years ago they voted to not show what they're voting, yes or no, on each motion. Now they're actually doing it remotely, so they can do as they please, which normally they do anyway. If you've ever been at Congress, it's a very, very interesting event. I spoke for as part of the GPA kind of little seminar there a couple of years ago, and I saw firsthand how it actually works, and all these, provincial delegates and county delegates come together. It's a real politicians kind of mix where, you're lending votes here and here, over and back. And if you vote for my motion, I'll vote for your motion. The only good thing about it was that our esteemed friend, the London GAA chairman, I ended up, who's my best friend, obviously, we know that, I ended up having a big feed of pints of Guinness with him, and he bought all night. So, I can't complain about that man in that case then.
Yeah, Ciaran, I heard about that night with him. I think you stayed up until about 4 o'clock. You had about 10, 12 pints of Guinness with him.
Oh,
very good.
And then he sacked me.
It didn't help your situation anyway with London.
that might have been the vote of confidence they call Kiers.
That's the dreaded vote of confidence in GAA in Ireland. They feed you 10 pints of Guinness and then they sack you.
Yeah, but just on the Congress, obviously, I think one of the things that came out of that virtual Congress was that there's nothing happening before July. They don't envisage anything happening before July. I know that they have said previously that they wanted to prioritise finishing off the league. Yeah. And I know that there are only 2 games left in the league. And of course, the league then determines, the league this year, I think, will determine the championship next year as to what tier you're going to be in. Yes. So if you finish in Division 1 or 2, then you're going to be going for Sam Maguire. If you finish in 3 and 4, then it's that Tier 2 competition. So I think it's very important that they try to finish the league, those 2 games. I know it's 2 games. Can they do it? If you were talking about the championship, that's a different kettle of fish altogether. I don't think it's going to happen because they have to prioritise the league. But, it's still up in the air as well, Ciaran.
But people who will hear that, Joe, they'll say, well, who gives a damn about the league? Like, why are we bothering trying to crowbar in these 2 games down in Ockram and, Dungarvan and whatever? What is the point? Is that what we're returning back to the GAA for? We're finally getting back to games, and then they're putting on the bloody National League. And people say, well, what's the point in that?
Yeah, I can understand why people might say that, but there are probably 2 reasons. The first reason is it will determine what championship you'll be in next year, what tier you'll be in next year, which is very important. And maybe when this whole thing is over, there's a possibility of the championship starting next year, next May. So that's one of the reasons. Also, I think with some of the divisions, it may only be 1 game, because then the other games may be obsolete. You may not have to play the other games because the relegations may have been decided and the promotions may have been decided already. So is there the capacity there to play one game or to play two games to finish off the league? It's highly unlikely at the minute with the social distancing, with some of the things that the UK government have been saying, what the Irish government have been saying. Obviously, they've extended the lockdown. So yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult to see any type of football being played this season.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing in a normal season where the placings don't determine the championship next year, the competition next year, I think they'd probably say, listen, who cares? It doesn't really matter. But because they brought that rule in with the B, well, we shouldn't call it the B Championship, should we? We should call
the Tailteann Cup, is it?
Tailteann Cup, the Tailteann Games, the Tailteann Cup, which I'm a big supporter of, Joe, you know that. But because of that, then there is an importance of actually getting it finished. And if you look at right across the spectrum of all sports, and especially football, from what they're saying, they really want to keep the integrity of the competitions, and they want to finish out the competitions. And Ross, like if you look at the football, in the football sense, like the one thing that's come out of all the Premier League meetings, apparently we're being told, is that they want to finish off the season and they want to keep the integrity of the competition.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. We discussed this amongst the clubs, and we get feedback from the Premier League and the EFL meetings, and the consensus is that everyone wants to finish off. I mean, if you think at the top end, I know across the leagues, though, you're talking about relegations and promotions, but even a team like Joe's beloved Liverpool, like they've had a fantastic season, and unfortunately this has come at a real bad time for them. And I know sport, if we put this into context now, like sport is nothing really in terms of what is going on in the world and the health and the fatalities that we're seeing day to day. But in the context of football, like they were due to have the best season they've ever had. Like it's and potentially now, even if they go back and play it, it's not going to have the same feel as a regular season. But it is important we finish this season. And what's coming out now is that I think managers are trying to get together and trying to say, look, we need to push this back to give enough time to start the league in an appropriate time frame. So at the moment they're trying to push for August time frame, which again is still a little bit up in the air, but at least it gives a few months to kind of see what's going on. The Premier League and the EFL have come out and said that mid-May, teams can go back training until mid-May. So that's the current standpoint. Now, that's only to honour the players 5 weeks of an off-season period with no, because at the moment they've been going 2 weeks, but it's to give them a clear 5-week period where they know they're not going to be back training. So that's just from a contractual standpoint. So that's probably a little bit of work from the PFA as well, kind of liaising with those organisations and the EFL.
And Ross, we're probably at that stage at the moment where they're all following the government line of, well, this is the official standpoint, and that the lockdown has been extended for another 3 weeks. So we work off that timeline, and we work off contractual issues of that they must have 5 weeks of off season, which is really, actually, I didn't know that, which is really interesting. So they must give 5 weeks minimum a break, an off season. But we're probably at that stage, aren't we, at the moment, where they're not coming out with wild plans of saying, well, this is going to happen and we're going to have it definitely in August, and here's the structure of it. We're really at the stage where it's going, okay, well, this is what we know and this is what we're going with at this moment.
Yeah, which can be looked at two different ways. I mean, we followed a lot of companies and a lot of big establishments have followed the government guidelines since day dot on this. And me and you we've openly spoke out in different contexts and said that actually that's quite wrong. I don't think the government set clear guidelines or were definitely late to the party in certain things over here in the UK. But in this context, I think that's probably the right thing to do. Give them till mid-May and then we can reassess, because I don't think you can program for August now. I think if you program for August now, that could get blown up as well and just not go ahead. So I think doctors have come out, medics have come out, and have said forget about sport for the moment. So not even September, October, where you're looking safe. Forget about sport, unless there's some way of getting it ahead that's not going to put lives at risk.
Yeah, I think the thing is that they don't want to put a date in the diary because they're afraid that they'll get to that date and they'll just go, well, obviously it's not going ahead. So they don't want to look foolish. And I think the GAA are following that lead as well, where they don't want to say, well, the championship is definitely going ahead at this point, because, they'll end up with like mud on their faces, because it may not, and it probably won't come back at that period. Joe, we as a club, we were probably a little bit quicker reacting to the crisis than the governmental guidelines and advice. And I think at that stage, 3 weeks ago, the government were still saying, go to the big matches, go to the Liverpool Champions League against Atletico Madrid. It's not a problem. Go to school. And we as an academy then said, well, hold on. I think we need to protect our players, protect our staff, and actually close down the setup. And I think a lot of businesses actually did that, didn't they? Like large multinational companies will said, well, we're actually not going to follow the UK government guidelines on this. We're going to react a lot quicker. But the problem is we've got a right-wing Tory government in place in the House of Commons, Joe. If we had a socialist communist party like you were a supporter of, none of this would have happened.
Yeah, I think that the UK government have been we're very slow in closing the whole thing down. As you said, Ciaran, businesses, their priority is to look after their employees, to make sure their employees are safe. And if your employees aren't safe, then businesses can be open to lots of things. So yeah, I think that the Conservative government, without getting too political, I think they were too slow to close it down. And now they're getting a lot of criticism from the media because they were too slow. So because of that criticism, and Piers Morgan is one who criticizes heavily, if you follow him on Twitter. So I think that they'll be reluctant. The UK government will be very reluctant to open it up again as quick. So I can't really see any activity happening even this year. You could say even 2020.
Joe, the only thing to add to that is that, I think they're going to be reluctant, but I think they're really, and they've already come out and said how concerned they are about the economy. And I think sport is a massive part of that economy. So. Yeah. I think you're right. They're going to have to take really measured approaches, but they're going to be desperate, aren't they, to get some of this back on for the economy and businesses working again at some point.
You see,
yeah. On the other side of the coin of that too, Ross, is the unintended consequences of closing down an economy, because you have other things that prop up. You've got things like domestic violence that prop up at home. You've got other types of illnesses. We've seen people not going into hospitals who have got heart problems, who are taking strokes, and they're dying at home. So there are other knock-on effects of closing down the whole economy. So I think that the UK government have to get the balance right here. And I think that in some ways, sport cannot really put too much pressure on the government or lobby the government too much and say, listen, we need to get back as quick as we can, because there are other considerations that need to be taken into consideration.
But lads, as we know, the Conservative Party and the Tory Party, they care about the money, the economy. They're the party of business, as they always say. As regards the coronavirus and the NHS and the 10 years of cuts to the staffing and the nurses and not allowing immigrants in to help our health system, don't worry about that, because every Thursday night we go out at 8 o'clock and we clap hands and we bang on a drum and bang on a saucepan, and that will solve all those issues. There won't be any more problems with that.
I mean, there's obviously some hypocrisy in this whole crisis, isn't there? Not really politically, but we are where we are, and I think it's definitely that it's going to be hard to see how they're going to do it, but I think they're desperately going to want to get things like professional sport back on at some point for the economy and for maybe other mental well-being stuff as well, Joe. I mean, here's one thing to talk about, the difference between obviously the football and the GAA. Officially, the GAA is amateur. Well, it is amateur. Aside from, there is obviously money involved in TV and at top level, there is some money there, won't talk about it too much, but there is.
Fucking Joe Coulter taking the money from the London chairman, robbing his back pocket practically, his own personal money, and Joe Coulter getting paid thousands. That's the problem with the GAA, Ross. That's the issue.
Well, I mean, if you look at the official lines, it's amateur, so it should the money side shouldn't be too much of an issue there, even though it is going to affect, the thousands of crowds you get. But in sport, there are careers, there's staff that need to be paid, they're employed, there's players obviously that are employed. So if this goes on and sport does get abolished for a real long period of time, what implications does that have on the people working in that industry, as much others of the country? But it's definitely something to consider.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Men, we'll take a quick break. Go and get your cup of coffee and a drink of water. Get your sandwich in. Remember, people who are listening, thanks very much for listening at all stages. Remember, go over and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all the other platforms, up on all platforms now. And make sure you head over to the website, deelysportscience.com. We've got a 20% offer there to join up, and let's get you involved in the conversation. Welcome back to the Locker Room podcast from deelysportscience.com. Men, I have to mention, anybody who's watching on YouTube, and make sure to go over and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Deely Sports Science. What do you reckon of the logo behind my back here on the monitor? You happy with it?
Yeah, it's very good, Ciaran. I think Ross was the main instigator and helped to choose that one. So fair play to Ross.
Well done, Ross.
No, it was a democracy, as we are over here, kids. You put up a few, didn't you? And we had to choose one of them. So, that one was the better one. Well done.
Yeah. Joe had a few dodgy images in his phone book and everything, so we definitely didn't go with any of them. I have to give a shout out. So John Regan does our graphic design. Ian with Big Top Multimedia over in Dublin, and James Weiser as our web developer. And if anybody likes the look of the website, it's in large part thanks to those three guys, and they've done great work with the website and making it look nice and everything like that. Ross, I like things looking visually nice and engaging.
Yeah, we're the polar opposites in that sense. I just want to get things done, and you procrastinate and make sure it's perfect. So the partnership works quite well.
Listen, you should talk to my wife, okay? She knows all about that.
I bet you drive her mad.
Oh God, she's a lawyer, so she's the opposite of me as well. Okay, anyway, we're talking about what now for sport, and we're looking at predominantly football and the GAA in Ireland. So football in the UK and GAA in Ireland. Obviously, it's replicated right throughout the world in terms of American football and basketball and Aussie rules and everything like that. The Olympics is a really interesting one that we might have a chat about at some stage again, what they're going to do. But just in terms of football, Ross, we know the Conservative Party love money. We know that football is money. So it makes logical sense that they're going to do all they can to get football back on our screens, for the fans, and also to keep the economy running and pumping money in and out of the economy. And it makes sense that the football season starts back up in the summer, surely.
From that perspective, it makes complete sense. And I think, it'd be lovely to hear what's really going on behind closed doors and the democratic personnel and what they're talking about, because I think they're going to be desperate at some point to get this going ahead. I can't see it happening, Kears. I definitely can't see it happening from a perspective of fans going to watch the game. I think that would be really setting yourself up to fail. If you look at, the farcical game of Liverpool and Atletico Madrid, when there was actually people who contracted this disease who was involved with those clubs. And a report from Italy as well. I think Atalanta played a game again, I think, in February.
Valencia.
And what they're saying now is Valencia, and they're saying now that was like a massive drive for this spread of disease. So I think you have to look at what's happened already around the world and really respect that from a medical perspective. Yeah,
so that's interesting because we hear Bergamo constantly on the TV, or we have over the last weeks. Now London is nearly taken over from that, and New York and etc. in America. But listen, that's a whole different podcast, Joe, as regards Trump. But I mean, I've only heard of Bergamo as an airport that caters for Milan, and I didn't know Atalanta actually are from Bergamo. But as you say, that was like a super spreader of the disease right throughout northern Italy, and especially Bergamo. And then the Valencia fans going back to Spain, I don't know how much it was spread like that. You know, can they actually allow something like that to happen? Seems unlikely. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, no, I don't think they morally can. I think that because of what's happened and the scrutiny that the government have come under. I mean, like Italy were under scrutiny as well for the way they acted, but they acted a way lot faster than the UK did.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, and we're on course to go past them in terms of like fatalities and stuff, which is very sad to hear. So I don't think they can put mass people in risk like that. The option they have is playing these games at somewhere location behind closed doors at some point. I think that's what they'll be exploring first.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you something that sparked my worry probably about 3 weeks ago. Was I was watching and listening to stories on the ground in Italy from the doctors and the nurses, and they were saying this is a war zone. This is not the flu. This is not seasonal flu. This is deadly. And our message to the UK and the rest of Europe is lockdown now. And that was probably about 10 days before the UK actually did lockdown, you know, and their response was like, lockdown now. This is the time to do it. This is the point that you will save lives. But subsequent to that, a few days later, China sent a whole lot of expert doctors and consultants and nurses over to Italy, northern Italy, to help. You know what their response was? They couldn't believe how lax the lockdown was in Italy. The Chinese were saying, oh, like, you need to properly shore up stuff here. This is too lax. This is too relaxed, and the virus will spread. And that made me think that, wow, this is something different. And since that event, if you look at the pictures coming out of the Italian hospitals, that now it's like a war zone in that people are completely covered. There are certain wards completely off limits. There's a live section and an open section, let's call it. But even in the UK, like we're not at that stage even now, or definitely not in America. So it's interesting to see how it will actually progress over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, absolutely, Ciaran. And I think that for Western countries, alarm bells should have been ringing when South Korea and Japan completely shut down, because they obviously knew what was happening in China. And when they shut down, and they shut down really early, and you can see that the figures are borne out in South Korea and Japan, very low death figures compared with the UK and those Western European countries. Yeah. So I think when that happened, the UK government should have shut it down straight away. Yeah. But now we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, the interesting thing, you know, about Korea and Japan is that they, aside from locking down aspects of the economy and the country, that they identified, tracked, traced, and that's how they've managed to keep the virus under control. And in the UK, certainly, like, that's just simply not happening. The testing is very reactive. Like the testing is not going on to the same level. But let me tell you anyway, lads, what the ideas and the plans that are being spoken about in terms of the Premier League, Ross, that we're hearing is that one major idea that the clubs at the very top level are pushing out is a kind of a festival of football in the summer months. So July or August, and this leads on from the testing, that they think by July or August there'll be far more testing available. The virus will have dampened down a little bit. What they're going to do is get all clubs, all Premier League clubs, based in and around a part of London and a part of the Midlands. So two kind of hubs. Each club then will be locked away in a hotel, quarantined in a hotel. They'll obviously need at least 14 days quarantine. You know, never mind anyway, they'll have to do their pre-season, so it'll be longer than that. And then games will be played behind closed doors. And everybody will be quarantined, including the medics, the sports science, the coaches, the catering staff in the hotel, the cleaners, the hotel owners, and they just get ferried from hotel to game, back to hotel, and they're talking about a real, like a World Cup festival of football where there's a match every day of the week. And like, it sounds amazing, you know, because it's like a match every day on Sky Sports, and the people of the UK and around the world will be, oh my, this is absolutely incredible watching these games. And that's the idea that's been floated at the moment.
Yeah, it's like dreamland, isn't it? I mean, for us at home in lockdown, happy days. But listen, you have to think of the realities. I think that's absolutely madness to even be suggesting that, because you've got, okay, so you have to be tested, and you have to be tested essentially then every time. If you think about it in theory and science, every time that team leaves the hotel, gets on the bus, effectively then they should have to get tested because they're going into a stadium. So if someone's then found positive, like, you can't let them go into the stadium. Well, in fact, then you probably then have to shut that team down, and then in effect then shut down the whole tournament. That's if one instance of COVID then is found within any one of those staff and players working those teams. And then you've got, you know, external, it's not like you can cut yourself off in a bubble, because the food has to be transported there. You've got people delivering food from outside of this kind of bubble land. You can't just all grow it within the areas. So, you know, something could have been caught on one of the lettuces, for example, and brought in. I just think it's madness. And then what about other leagues? So that's the Premier League that you're going to try. What about the Championship? Are they going to be remoted off to somewhere in Cornwall and do it, you know, down in there? And we're going to have these hubs all over the country. I think it's absolutely madness to suggest that.
No, we'll be sent to Milton Keynes, Ross, or somewhere like that.
Well, I think if we're talking about academy, I think forget academy football. You know, now they're talking about senior level, trying to honour the leagues and stuff. I think academy football, just forget about it until whenever you get instructed to do so and it's safe. But I think this idea is, madness.
But
just on that point, Ross, you're not going to have any fans at the game. There's not going to be any crowds at the game. And one of the things that makes a festival are the fans, and you're not going to have that. So the atmosphere at some of these games, and if we're going to watch a game on TV with nobody in the stadium, and you can hear them kicking the ball, and you can hear the players talking to each other, you know, it's not going to look well.
The only thing though, lads, is you would say, like, for instance, we're all quarantined, we're all self-isolating at the moment. Like Joe, probably more than anybody. His life hasn't really changed anyway in this lockdown. He can't even go on his Tinder dates, virtual Tinder dates these days. But if you think about it, like, we go to the shop, don't we? We go to the shop, you know, once a week, once every 2 weeks. People come to the door, they deliver stuff. Like, it's impossible to completely 100% self-isolate. We do it to as strong as we can. And remember, the bin man is working, the shop assistant is working, the doctors and nurses and the hospitals and the bus drivers, like, there are precautions, but they are working.
Yeah, but if you think if the advice and the scientific advice would be that if you come into contact with anyone with COVID-19, that you then have to self-isolate for even more strict measures than that for 14 days. If someone in the team is, and you know, if we know that the bin man's got COVID and he's touched our bin, and we take extra precautions to clean it or whatever, but we don't know exactly who's carried it. But if someone in the team knows that someone else has got it, and they've played another team, and the hotel staff have been serving this team for X amount of days, like, everyone then has to shut down and isolate even further stricter measures. So the league then just gets abolished.
A follow-up point would be though, is that, like, money talks, and the Premier League has a lot of money, and football in general generates a lot of money, and the fans will want it, and people are sitting at home. And I know what you're saying, Joe, about you need the fans and the enjoyment, but I see people on Twitter saying they would watch paint dry at the moment if it was a sport. Like, they would watch. I have two friends, Derek and Darren O'Reilly, who have taken up watching the Belarusian football league at the moment, because they're the only league that are still going, and they're like following teams, and they're saying, oh, well, you know, Minsk are pretty poor away from home. It's unexpected to lose that game, and, you know, and they're getting great fun from it. So will some realities of economics, money, and fans' interest and fans' mental well-being, will that supersede any other issues, safety like that you're saying, Ross? And in some ways they'll be treated like essential workers, and that we have to get this on our TV screens.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility here is that something's going to return because of the reasons you said. I think though, if that's going to happen, but I could see, even if it's a few weeks later, like games as low down as League One, League Two going ahead, and they're essential workers behind closed doors, but they're still going to games and playing as opposed to going to like a central hub. Maybe that could be something that happens at some point.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Joe, just to make it even more complicated, so then if we switch over to the GAA setup in Ireland, GAA, for anybody who doesn't know, obviously completely amateur sport, apart from your big paycheck from the London County Board. But these lads have normal jobs. They're at home with their families. I mean, not that different, Ross, in some ways than the footballers. Like, some of the footballers won't want to leave home. They may be living with their elderly mother or grandparent or vulnerable child, and they'll be thinking, well, I don't want to quarantine myself away for the next month. And the physio is probably thinking, well, I want to help people in the NHS. I don't want to add to the problem of the NHS. And that's probably a point as well also, Ross, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many factors to consider into this, and it would have to get a massive agreement from everybody. But then if they are considered as key workers, that's a big responsibility for them to take on. And like you say, some of them, okay, Premier League are slightly different, but if we go down the leagues and filter down the leagues, you've got players that aren't on great money, maybe supplement with other stuff going on, and have other work and are involved in other businesses to help family and support loved ones. So because we were talking about the amateur stuff and referencing that to like the part-time footballers, and even as low as the conference at the 3 days a week, the 2 days a week. So this is going to be a huge decision to be made on what happens at top level, and if you are honouring the leagues, that has to stand for all leagues, not just the Premier League.
Yeah. So Joe, the GAA in some ways is similar like the football non-league teams, because people, they train part-time, they play part-time, but they also have their jobs. And like the thought of, or the thinking of any kind of quarantine for GAA players is complete nonsense, isn't it? Surely, like it cannot happen.
Absolutely, because the GAA players are the community, and they're in the community. So no, I can't really see it happening. Who really wants to be the person that goes out and plays a game of football and then goes and visits their auntie or their grandmother, and possibly a couple of weeks later your grandmother or your auntie's in hospital, and it may have been because of you. So who wants to have that burden over their heads? So it's not really something practical that I think that we can consider until some kind of vaccine is found, unfortunately. So social distancing is completely impossible when it comes to sports. So I can't really see anything happening.
I mean, the thing is if you think of sport, like even players tackling, coming in contact with each other, even in football, like Ross, some people will say there's no physical contact in football. We know otherwise, that like those guys are tough athletes, aren't they? But like, it is impossible to social distance in a game of football or GAA hurling, isn't it? Like, it's just not possible to play or train like that.
No, you can't. You can't have social distancing measures if we're going to go back to sport. It's just. There's no point. But I think that if we do go back to sport, then those workers, they won't be able to go and see loved ones that are vulnerable. If it does get back to that, they will not. Like Joe said, you can't have that burden of affecting the vulnerable and causing more fatality. So there'll have to be strict measures to what these people can do. Obviously, they're going to be within their own household, but they're going to have to limit contact with the vulnerable and stuff like that.
Yeah, Joe, what do you think of, like, there's journalists now, and probably it's just giving them something to do, really. You see it up on Twitter where they're speculating about, well, it could return in July, it could be August, could be September, it should be a straight knockout, the provincial championships must go ahead. Other people are saying there has to be like a qualifier system that you need at least 2 chances. Like, the first question is there any point in talking about that stuff at all? Like, is it an absolute just waste of time? But secondly, if we do, let's just say we do return, let's say the virus is completely suppressed over the summer months, testing is widely available. Let's just, believe in a kind of a fairyland that this virus is gone or suppressed in some sense, and there is a championship. Like, what do we do? So does it matter? And next, what do we do, or what are the options for us?
Yeah, I think in Gaelic football, I think there comes a time when maybe you have to kind of just say, well, the season has to be written off. We can't play any more football for the foreseeable future. Yeah. And when you think about sport, and we all love our sport, we all love our football, and we all love our Gaelic football, but unfortunately in society you have to take these measures and you have to make sacrifices. And until there is some kind of, as you say, widespread testing, until we kind of see some kind of vaccine, unfortunately sport is going to have to maybe just be shelved. Yeah. And it's very difficult for people. And as Ross said, because professional soccer is all about the livelihoods of the players, and probably Gaelic football will take less of a hit because players aren't really reliant on any kind of income. Yeah. It's difficult for professional football.
Yeah, I mean, the Tom Ryan actually came out and is the Director General of the GAA. A good buddy of mine, I have to say, back to my Temple Oak Sing Street days in Dublin coaching. He was one of the dads on the sideline, along with Tony Houlihan, actually the Chief Medical Officer, Joe. He was a dad on the sideline, and I asked him to come and get involved. And lo and behold, Tom Ryan is running the GAA, and Tony Houlihan is doing a good job running the country, which is great to see at the moment. Stressful job. But in terms of, like, can any of these competitions go ahead without vaccines, without testing? I mean, does it matter? Like, it's really hard to know. But on the other hand, if we somehow do, like, should we run the club season first for a few weeks and get players up to scratch and get their fitness levels up, and then run into a county season and run it off as quick as possible? Or like, what are the options? What could you do?
Well, hypothetically, if sport were to come back, and if Gaelic football, hurling was to come back, then you'd have to maybe say that you'd have to get the club scene back up and running first. And you would use that as a kind of pre-season. I know that people have talked about it as kind of pre-season for the county football. But I just cannot see it coming back anytime soon. Yeah. Because what it also does, Ciaran, is if you start to relax the social distancing measures by having football being played, then it sort of sends out a wider message to the whole community that, social distancing doesn't matter anymore. And then once that happens, we talk about that transmission rate. If it goes above 1, then we see an exponential rise in the amount of people getting it. And then we're back again to a second peak. And it could be even worse than the first peak. Yeah. So that's why these chief medical officers are very, very worried, and they're very prudent. The UK ones at the beginning, you may have seen that they were not prudent because apparently they wanted herd immunity. So, you have to think about a second peak and it even doing more damage to the economy. And then we don't get football again for another year. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I meant to say, just as regards the point with Tom Ryan, that he had said in an interview last week that the GAA are looking at like a 60 million euro hit from this. So if you think of like the money that comes in at the central level from the inter-county game, and that trickles down to all the clubs and the provinces, like the whole game is going to be badly hit, isn't it? It really is. And he did an interview actually a month ago, which I listened to last night, a podcast actually, and he was saying that this was, more than a month ago, before any of this hit, and he was saying that the business model of the GA is not a sustainable one, where all the money comes in each season, all the money goes straight back out, back to the county teams, to the counties, provinces, clubs, etc., different stakeholders, and that there's no reserve of money held in the coffers in Croke Park, which is a poor business model, isn't it? And he said, God forbid something bad happens, an unexpected event, we have no money in the coffers. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, the coronavirus hit, and they have no extra kind of funds there backing them up. So it's a tricky situation.
Well, that comes down to, poor financial management at the end of the day. If you don't have any reserves for a rainy day, as it were, then you're definitely going to be in trouble. But the GAA, most of the funding from the GAA obviously comes from the ticket receipts, and those 80,000 people in Croke Park for the county obviously comes from the big county games. So not having that means that the GAA are in trouble.
I think like a few things about that in terms of talk of games behind closed doors in terms of GA for TV, I think is nonsense. Like it just, there's no point, because it's a very much a community-based sport, and there's just no point. If we were to return, I quite like the idea actually of a little bit of the club season, as you said, as a kind of a pre-season leading into the county. And I've heard people on Twitter and out there saying, scrap the county, let's just go back to basics and play the club. That's fine. But the reality of the matter of the GA is that the county game makes the money. That's the game that brings the vast majority of the revenue in. Now, it also costs the GA money, huge money, like running the county teams, and it's gone crazy. But it's actually the inter-county games. And if you look at the financial reports, it's the All-Ireland final, the All-Ireland semi-finals, a little bit of the All-Ireland quarterfinals. And that's it. Like, you're talking about 3-4 games per season is the thing that pays for everything. So any talk of like on the return not following through that season with the inter-county game is just pie in the sky kind of talk.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, the counties are the main, revenue generator for some of the clubs. So yeah, but having the club scene back, I think, will do a lot of good for communities. But as we know, this isn't going to come back to normal for maybe 18 months, possibly, until we can get a vaccine.
Yeah, Ross, you had an idea about how to finish this season and its implications on next season in terms of professional football.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously a little quite clear to say that there's obviously a massive disparity between what's going to happen in the professional world of football and sport over here to maybe what's going to happen in the GA, because it's seen as amateur, Joe, and that's not to belittle the GA, but I think that there's more financial implications on the professional side in terms of people having to live and of course there's financial implications of the GA, but I don't think it's as severe, and I don't think they'll take the risk as much with it. So I think they're going to, within the next year, like finish the season in football before the vaccine comes. I think that's quite not a prediction, but I think that will happen personally. I think they will at some point get that going. So my idea was, look, scrap next season, because you're looking at, for example, the end of next year, you're meant to have the Euros, for example. Then the following year after that, you've got the World Cup in Qatar, which is meant to be December. So we haven't got loads of time on our hands. And if we are going to have periods of social distancing, relaxing, and then coming back into play for a bit more, and then relaxing, if we want more smaller waves as opposed to a second massive peak, then I just think finish the season, give yourself the whole time of next season to finish off this season. Let's honour however we do it contractually, but let's honour like contracts and like avoid any transfer, so everyone stays in the same teams. We can hopefully retain majority of staff and not make people unemployed, and give yourself a lot of time over next season to finish off this period, which then allows for mini breaks of the game within the season, if that makes sense, to honour the games, instead of trying to cram this season in and then going back to next season, which could be a shorter format, and then into the Euros and then into the World. That's just a disaster for everyone, I think, for the global pandemic, but also just the reality of trying to fit it all in.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting actually, because if you think of it, within the next, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, within the next 18 months, they would need to finish this season, finish next season, play the Euros, and play the World Cup, because the World Cup in Qatar it's a winter tournament. I think it's January, isn't it?
January, yeah.
January. So like there's so much to cram in there, and all of a sudden you've got a backlog, and it's. Yeah, no, I think it could be a good idea.
And that also, I mean, if you're cramming that amount of games in, especially within these times where there could be no vaccine, and again, you're opening yourself up medically to cause mass spread and stuff. So yeah, I think it could really open themselves up.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, lads. If and when we return, because obviously you hope at some stage we're going to return with a vaccine or with some other different testing measures and stuff like that. I'm quite interested to see who will actually benefit. I'm being facetious, but who will benefit out of this crisis in terms of professional football and in the GAA? Joe, is there any, in every situation, there are winners and losers, and out of this, it'll be the same. Just in terms of the sporting sense, looking beyond any of the other health crises and all, but just in terms of the sporting sense, are there any teams that you think this will actually negatively affect or maybe even benefit in the GAA in terms of the inter-county game?
Yeah, I think when you look at it, you might think that it's going to be survival of the fittest. And in this context, you might say that the fittest will be the biggest clubs, the clubs with the most resources, the clubs with the most money, the clubs with the best players. So from that point of view, you would probably think that in GAA, it's going to be Dublin, it's going to be Kerry, it's going to be Tyrone, these big clubs that have lots of resources. However, there is another angle to it as well. Those clubs that can adapt to the environment, or also, clubs that are very innovative, that have, good people in their clubs that are running their clubs, that can come up with good ideas. I think there's an opportunity for those clubs, or counties, to compete. So, on the face of it, you might think the big clubs, but, there is an opportunity for those, sort of smaller clubs to adapt.
See, I think actually in this situation, I understand what you mean about Dublin, and you always think that the big county and club with all the most amount of money will be the one who will benefit from situations. But if you think about it, that Dublin team is still backboned by a number of older players. Now, they stayed on an extra season to try and win a 6th in a row, to win a 7th in a row, whereas now there's a break in that. Now, I know the next championship winners, if it's Dublin, they can say that, well, that is 6 in a row, regardless of it being this season or next season. But I see this situation, this coronavirus, actually retiring a lot of players, because the players will say, do you know what? I don't know, do I want to give the commitment? I don't know, do I want to put my health in danger, my family's health in danger? I've for the Dublin lads, I've achieved a lot in the game. I've won my 5 in a row. I've won my 7 All-Irelands. I'm going to pack up now. And they may lose, the likes of McCarthy and some of those in Cluxton and big Keane O'Sullivan, big name players for Dublin. I reckon they could lose them. And I was thinking Galway will be the most disappointed, because they were having such a good season under Pádraig Joyce, and all of a sudden now there's a break and that momentum is gone, and I think they'll be desperately disappointed. And on the flip side, Kerry always find a way, don't they? No matter what happens down through the years and whatever the northern teams throw at them, and Dublin, they always find a way. And it wouldn't surprise me to see the Kerry boys down in the countryside of Kerry, a little bit away from the epicenter of the virus outbreak in Dublin as well, which may have an effect. the Kerry boys might be working away on their own, and they may find a way in this.
Yeah, well, we know they're very cute. They're very cute in Kerry. And obviously Kerry have a lot of excellent young footballers, David Clifford, Sean O'Sullivan. So, you might think that they're at the other spectrum where they can actually take advantage of this. But yeah, I think Cluxton, he's coming up to 40 years of age very soon. Yeah. So, you could see players retiring en masse because of this situation. Yeah. And you may look to the counties that have the younger players coming through. But it's also the setup of those counties as well, which counties can adapt to the situation the best and hold together.
Yeah. Ross, just briefly then, last few minutes, in terms of the football, professional football, any clubs that you think may, suffer from this or may benefit when we do return?
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with Joe. I think the bigger clubs are going to have more resources during this time and can offer the players maybe stuff that other lower clubs can't get. Especially within this furlough exercise, there's only a limited amount of staff for some players to actually access during this time. So the lower clubs, I think, if they're creative with their staff and the way they're doing things and the way they're doing stuff, then I think they could pull through this. But you'd probably think the top six have got more stuff going on. They're being a bit more creative in the way they're giving programs of support, the psychological support, the network they have around them in the club is going to pull them through a little bit more, I would say.
Yeah. You think of, for instance, Manchester City with Abu Dhabi support, like state level support with all their petrol money and everything like that. Like they will still have money, won't they? They've got reserves of money. And like an interesting point is FIFA or UEFA, not fair play awards, but the amount of money that you can spend and everything like that may actually be relaxed a little bit after this, I wonder. And the big clubs like, Abramovich with Chelsea or Manchester City, as I mentioned, or maybe United's owners, they may splash a little bit. They may take the opportunity to go, do you know what? We're actually going to get ahead of all the other clubs and make a little bit of a splash here.
Yeah, they could do. I think it's up to them governing bodies to actually, personally, put an embargo on any transfers, especially until this official season has been ended. I think it'd be unfair after this time for big clubs to go and purchase better players when the lower clubs are struggling just to keep afloat. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, lads, I'll leave you with one sobering thought. I was reading a report by Morgan Stanley, massive multinational company, which I'm sure, Joe, you read plenty about. That's the kind of thing I do. They were predicting their model really is of work as we know it returning in springtime. So around next March, testing be widely available and businesses starting back up and sporting events, and then the countries opening up fully next summer. So that's quite an interesting one where they're envisaging society and the economy opening up next spring, including sporting organizations. So it'd be interesting to see by next March or so, is that the timeline that we're actually looking at? Okay, with that sobering thought, men, we'll leave it at that. We'll speak the next time a little bit about the return of training and what to do and how to organize that when the seasons do come back. We'll look to do that podcast in the future. For the moment, make sure you subscribe, go on to the website, loads of offers at the moment. Ross, Joe, thanks for having you on again this week.
Cheers, Kears. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it again.
Thanks, Ciaran. Enjoyed it.
Cheers. Okay, thanks, gang. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.